In the private collection of antique dealer Harrison Blackwood, housed in a climate-controlled vault beneath his Victorian mansion in Salem, Massachusetts, sits a photograph that has defied explanation for over a century and a half. The image, captured on a glass plate negative in the autumn of 1870, appears at first glance to be nothing more than a typical Victorian portrait of a well-to-do couple posing in their elegant parlor. The photograph shows Edmund and Cordelia Ashworth, newlyweds who had commissioned the portrait from renowned photographer Jeremiah Whitmore to commemorate their first anniversary. Edmund stands tall and distinguished in his finest black suit, his hand resting protectively on his young wife's shoulder. Cordelia sits gracefully in an ornate chair, her silk dress cascading around her in perfect folds, her delicate hands folded primly in her lap. Both wear the solemn expressions typical of Victorian photography, when subjects had to remain motionless for several minutes to achieve a clear image. Behind them, dominating the composition, stands an enormous gilt-framed mirror that reflects the opposite wall of their lavishly appointed parlor, or at least that's what it should reflect. What the mirror actually shows has puzzled historians, paranormal investigators, and photographic experts for more than a century, challenging everything we think we know about the nature of reality and the power of images to capture more than what the human eye can see. Harrison Blackwood first acquired the photograph in 2019 from the estate of Mrs. Agatha Pemberton, an elderly woman whose family had maintained the Ashworth collection for 5 generations. Mrs. Pemberton, then 93 years old and the last surviving member of her lineage, had contacted Blackwood specifically because of his reputation for handling unusual and potentially supernatural artifacts. She had spent her entire life caring for the photograph, keeping it in a locked cedar box in her bedroom, and she claimed that it had brought nothing but misfortune to everyone who had possessed it for any significant period. When Blackwood first examined the photograph under proper lighting conditions in his restoration laboratory, he immediately understood why Mrs. Pemberton had been so eager to part with it. The mirror in the background, which should have reflected the couple and the photographer's equipment, instead showed something that defied all logical explanation. Rather than the expected reflection of Edmund and Cordelia Ashworth, the mirror displayed an empty room that bore no resemblance to the parlor where the photograph had been taken. The reflected space appeared to be a different room entirely, one with bare wooden floors, stark white walls, and a single window that let in an ominous grey light. Most disturbing of all, in the far corner of this reflected room, barely visible but unmistakably present, stood a dark figure. The entity appeared to be humanoid in shape, but seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a void in the image that the human eye struggled to focus upon directly. Blackwood's initial assumption was that he was looking at a double exposure, a common accident in early photography, where 2 different images were accidentally superimposed on the same glass plate. But as he examined the photograph more closely using modern digital enhancement techniques, he discovered that the image showed no signs of multiple exposures. The couple and their parlor were captured with perfect clarity and proper focus, while the mirror's impossible reflection was equally sharp and detailed, suggesting that both images had been captured simultaneously rather than layered together through photographic error. The investigation into the Ashworth photograph led Blackwood deep into the archives of 19th century Salem, a city already famous for its supernatural history, but hiding secrets that went far beyond the well-documented witch trials of the previous century. What he discovered about Edmund and Cordelia Ashworth would transform his understanding of the photograph from a curious antique into evidence of a tragedy that had echoed through 5 generations. Edmund Ashworth had been a successful textile merchant who had built his fortune during the industrial boom following the Civil War. Born into modest circumstances in 1845, he had demonstrated an unusual talent for business and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate market trends. By the age of 24, he owned 3 textile mills and had invested heavily in the railroad expansion that was transforming New England's economy. His success had allowed him to purchase Ravens Hollow Manor, a sprawling Gothic revival mansion on the outskirts of Salem that had been built in 1856 by a wealthy ship captain who had died under mysterious circumstances before ever occupying the house. Cordelia Whitman had been 19 when she married Edmund in the spring of 1869. The daughter of a prominent Boston family, she was known throughout New England society for her beauty, intelligence, and artistic talents. She painted watercolor landscapes, played piano with professional skill, and spoke 3 languages fluently. Her marriage to Edmund had been considered a perfect match by everyone who knew them, uniting his commercial success with her cultural refinement and social connections. The couple had moved into Ravenshollow Manor immediately after their wedding, and by all contemporary accounts, they had been blissfully happy during their first year of marriage. Edmund's business continued to prosper, and Cordelia had transformed the mansion's interior into a showcase of Victorian elegance. They entertained frequently, hosting elaborate dinner parties and musical soirees that were attended by Salem's most prominent citizens. Their portrait, commissioned to commemorate their first wedding anniversary, was intended to capture the height of their domestic bliss and social success. But Blackwood's research revealed that the Ashworths' happiness had been tragically short-lived. Within 6 months of the portrait being taken, both Edmund and Cordelia were dead, victims of what the local newspaper had described as a domestic tragedy of unprecedented horror. The details of their deaths had been largely suppressed by their families and local authorities, but Blackwood eventually uncovered the truth in the private papers of Dr. Nathaniel Crane, the physician who had been called to Ravenshollow Manor on the night of March 15, 1871. According to Dr. Crane's detailed notes, he had been summoned to the manor by Edmund Ashworth himself, who had appeared at the doctor's home in a state of complete hysteria at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning. Edmund claimed that his wife had become violently ill and was experiencing symptoms that defied medical explanation. When Dr. Crane arrived at the manor, he found Cordelia in their bedroom, unconscious and running a fever of 105 degrees. More disturbing still, she appeared to be aging rapidly before their eyes, her youthful features becoming gaunt and lined, her lustrous dark hair turning white at the roots. Edmund insisted that his wife's condition had begun exactly 1 week earlier, on the anniversary of their portrait session. He claimed that Cordelia had begun complaining about seeing things in the mirrors throughout the house, reflections that didn't match reality, visions of empty rooms and dark figures that seemed to be watching her from behind the glass. At first, Edmund had dismissed these complaints as nervous exhaustion brought on by their busy social schedule, but as Cordelia's visions became more frequent and detailed, he had begun to share her fears. Dr. Crane's notes described Edmund's account of the events leading up to that terrible night. According to Edmund, the couple had begun avoiding the mirrors in their home, covering them with sheets and avoiding the rooms where large mirrors hung. But the reflections had somehow followed them, appearing in windows, in polished silverware, even in the surface of their morning tea. Cordelia had become convinced that something was trying to pull her into the world behind the mirrors, and she had begun to waste away as if her life force was being drained by some invisible presence. On the final night, Edmund claimed that he had awakened to find Cordelia standing before the large mirror in their parlor, the same mirror that appeared in their anniversary portrait. She was speaking to someone in the reflection, carrying on a conversation with a presence that Edmund could not see. When he called her name, she had turned to him with eyes that were completely white, devoid of pupils or irises, and had spoken in a voice that was not her own. "She told me that she had to go with them," Edmund had sobbed to Dr. Crane, said that she had been chosen, that the photograph had marked her somehow, and that there was no escaping what had been set in motion. Then she stepped forward toward the mirror, and I swear to you, Doctor, she began to disappear into the glass as if it were water. I tried to pull her back, but my hands passed right through her body, as if she were becoming a ghost before my eyes. Dr. Crane had initially dismissed Edmund's account as the ravings of a man driven mad by grief and exhaustion, but when he examined Cordelia more closely, he discovered something that challenged his rational medical training. The young woman's body was somehow becoming translucent, as if she were fading from physical existence. He could see the bed linens through her skin, could watch her heart beating through her increasingly transparent chest. Most impossibly of all, her reflection was completely absent from every mirror in the house. By dawn, Cordelia Ashworth had simply ceased to exist. Her body didn't die in any conventional sense. It simply faded away like morning mist, until nothing remained but the impression of her form in the bed linens and the lingering scent of her perfume in the air. Edmund, already driven to the edge of sanity by watching his wife disappear before his eyes, was found the next morning hanging from the chandelier in the parlor, directly in front of the mirror where he claimed Cordelia had vanished. The official cause of death for both Ashworths was listed as influenza, a convenient explanation that allowed their families to avoid the scandal and supernatural implications of the true events. Ravens Hollow Manor was sold within the month to a family from Boston who had no knowledge of its tragic history. The new owners lasted exactly 13 months before they too met with mysterious circumstances involving mirrors and unexplained disappearances. Blackwood's investigation revealed that Ravens Hollow Manor had changed hands 17 times between 1871 and 1923, when it was finally demolished by the city of Salem after being declared structurally unsound. Each family that had lived in the house had reported similar experiences: reflections that didn't match reality, the sensation of being watched from behind mirrors, and in 7 documented cases, the complete disappearance of family members who were last seen standing before the large parlor mirror. The photographer who had captured the Ashworth portrait, Jeremiah Whitmore, had also met with a mysterious fate. According to his business records, he had attempted to destroy the glass plate negative of the Ashworth portrait several times, claiming that it was cursed and that developing prints from it caused him to experience terrifying visions. In 1873, Whitmore was found dead in his darkroom, apparently having drowned in his developing chemicals despite the fact that the tank was only 18 inches deep and he was a strong swimmer. The photograph itself had passed through multiple owners over the subsequent decades, and Blackwood was able to trace a pattern of misfortune that seemed to follow the image wherever it went. Collectors who displayed the photograph prominently in their homes reported poltergeist activity, unexplained cold spots, and the gradual deterioration of all other mirrors in their houses. Those who attempted to study or analyze the image professionally often suffered from insomnia, depression, and vivid nightmares featuring the dark figure visible in the mirror's reflection. Most disturbing of all were the accounts of people who claimed to see the photograph change over time. Multiple witnesses reported that the dark figure in the mirror's reflection would sometimes appear in different positions, as if it were moving around the empty, reflected room. Some observers claimed that they could occasionally see additional figures in the mirror's depths, shadowy forms that might have been previous victims of whatever force had claimed Cordelia Ashworth. Dr. Sarah Kellaway, a professor of Victorian photography at Harvard University, examined the Ashworth photograph in 2020 at Blackwood's request. Using advanced spectral analysis and digital enhancement techniques, she was able to determine that the image contained no evidence of tampering, multiple exposures, or photographic manipulation. The mirror's impossible reflection was as authentic as the rest of the photograph, captured at the same moment with the same clarity and focus. More intriguingly, Dr. Kellaway's analysis revealed that the photograph seemed to exist in a state of constant, subtle change. When examined under different lighting conditions or at different times of day, the details visible in the mirror's reflection would shift slightly. The dark figure might appear closer to the window or further from it. The grey light filtering through the reflected window might be brighter or dimmer, and occasionally additional details would become visible that had not been apparent in previous examinations. It's as if the photograph is a window into an ongoing situation rather than a static record of a single moment, Dr. Kellaway explained in her official report. The image appears to be somehow alive, continuing to document events that are taking place in whatever realm or dimension is visible through that mirror. It challenges everything we understand about the nature of photography and the relationship between images and reality. The most chilling discovery came when Dr. Kellaway compared the Ashworth photograph to other Victorian portraits from the same period and region. She found that Edmund and Cordelia Ashworth appeared in 17 other photographs taken between 1870 and 1871, mostly as guests at social gatherings and public events. In every single one of these images, they cast no reflections in any mirrors, windows, or reflective surfaces that were visible in the background. This absence of reflections predated their anniversary portrait by several months, suggesting that whatever supernatural force had claimed them had been influencing their existence long before the dramatic events that led to their deaths. It also raised the terrifying possibility that the Ashworths had already been partially claimed by the world behind the mirrors, existing in a liminal state between physical reality and whatever dimension was visible in their portrait's impossible reflection. Blackwood's research into the history of Ravens Hollow Manor revealed that the house had been built on the site of a much older structure, a colonial-era mansion that had burned to the ground in 1855 under circumstances that paralleled the later tragedies. The original house had belonged to Captain Mordecai Ravenshollow, a wealthy merchant who had made his fortune in the China trade during the early 19th century. Captain Ravenshollow had been known for his extensive collection of mirrors, many of them acquired during his travels to exotic locations where local artisans created looking glasses using techniques and materials unknown in America. According to historical records, Captain Ravenshollow had become obsessed with mirrors in his later years, claiming that they allowed him to see into other worlds and communicate with beings that existed beyond the physical realm. His family and friends had initially dismissed these claims as the eccentricities of an aging sea captain who had spent too many years in foreign ports exposed to unfamiliar customs and beliefs. But as Ravenshollow's behavior became increasingly erratic and his claims more elaborate, concern grew among Salem's respectable society. The captain's final diary entries, preserved in the Salem Historical Society's archives, described his discovery of what he called the mirror realm, a parallel dimension that existed alongside the physical world, but operated according to different laws of time and space. He claimed that certain mirrors, particularly those created using specific materials and techniques, could serve as doorways between these realms, allowing entities from the mirror realm to influence events in the physical world. The beings behind the glass are not malevolent by nature, Captain Ravenshollow had written in his final entry, dated February 28, 1855. They are simply hungry for experiences that they cannot have in their own realm. They feed on human emotions, on the warmth of living flesh, on the complexity of mortal existence. They do not seek to harm us, merely to absorb what we have and they lack, but their hunger is insatiable, and once they have tasted a human soul, they will never stop trying to claim it entirely. The fire that destroyed the original Ravenshollow mansion began in the captain's study, where he kept his most prized mirrors. Witnesses reported that the flames seemed to emerge from the mirrors themselves, as if the glass surfaces had somehow become portals for an otherworldly fire that burned with unnatural colors and consumed everything it touched with impossible speed. Captain Ravenshollow's body was never found, though several witnesses claimed to have seen his figure moving behind the burning mirrors, even as the flames consumed the room around him. When the new Ravenshollow Manor was built on the same site the following year, the architect had unknowingly incorporated some of the original mirrors into the design. These mirrors, damaged by the fire but somehow still functional, had been salvaged from the ruins and restored by local craftsmen who were unaware of their supernatural properties. The large parlor mirror that would later feature in the Ashworth portrait was the most significant of these salvaged pieces, a massive gilt-framed looking glass that had served as the centerpiece of Captain Ravenshollow's collection. Blackwood's investigation revealed that every tragedy associated with Ravenshollow Manor had centered around this particular mirror. The 7 documented disappearances, the unexplained deaths, the reports of supernatural activity, all had involved people who had spent significant time in the parlor standing before the same mirror that had captured the impossible reflection in the Ashworth photograph. The connection between the mirror and the supernatural events became clearer when Blackwood discovered a collection of letters written by previous owners of the manor. These correspondence, spanning nearly 50 years, described remarkably consistent experiences. New residents would initially notice nothing unusual about the large parlor mirror, but gradually they would begin to see discrepancies between reality and reflection. The mirror would show empty rooms when people were present, different weather outside its reflected window, and most commonly, the presence of shadowy figures that had no corresponding existence in the physical world. As the residents became more aware of these discrepancies, the mirror's influence would grow stronger. People would find themselves drawn to stand before it for hours at a time, mesmerized by the alien landscape visible in its depths. They would begin to see the reflected world more clearly than their physical surroundings, and slowly they would start to fade from reality as their consciousness became trapped in the mirror realm. The process was always gradual, taking weeks or months to complete, but the endpoint was invariably the same. The victims would become increasingly translucent, losing their ability to cast reflections in other mirrors, until finally they would step forward into the large parlor mirror and disappear entirely from the physical world. Those who witnessed these disappearances reported that the victims seemed to pass through the mirror's surface as if it were liquid, and that they could sometimes be seen moving around in the reflected room for days or weeks afterward, before fading into the depths of whatever dimension lay beyond. Mrs. Agatha Pemberton, the previous owner of the Ashworth photograph, had shared with Blackwood a family legend that offered a possible explanation for the mirror's power. According to this legend, Captain Ravenshollow had not simply collected mirrors during his travels. He had actively sought out objects that were believed to be supernatural in origin. The large parlor mirror had supposedly been created in Tibet by monks who used it for meditation and spiritual communication, but it had been corrupted by exposure to negative spiritual forces during a period of political upheaval. The mirror was said to have been designed as a meditation tool that would allow the user to see into the spiritual realm and communicate with enlightened beings. But during a massacre at the monastery where it was created, the mirror had absorbed the fear, pain, and desperate desire for escape felt by the murdered monks. This trauma had transformed the mirror from a tool for spiritual enlightenment into a trap that lured souls into a liminal space where they could neither live nor die, neither exist fully in the physical world nor escape to whatever afterlife awaited them. Captain Ravenshollow had acquired the mirror from a British colonial official who had looted it from the destroyed monastery, unaware of its dark history. The captain had initially used it for its intended purpose, seeking spiritual insight and communication with other worldly beings. But gradually, the mirror had begun to show him visions of the mirror realm, a dimension populated by the souls of everyone who had ever been trapped within its reflection. The inhabitants of the mirror realm were not evil, according to the legend, but they were desperate to escape their eternal imprisonment. They had learned to reach out through mirrors into the physical world, seeking to trade places with living souls who could provide them with the life force they needed to break free from their glass prison. The process was always voluntary on some level. The mirrors could not simply steal souls, but they could seduce, manipulate, and gradually convince people to willingly step across the threshold between worlds. Cordelia Ashworth had been particularly susceptible to the mirror's influence because of her artistic and sensitive nature. Artists and creative individuals were said to be more likely to see beyond the surface of mirrors into the deeper realms that lay beneath, making them ideal targets for the entities trapped within. Her gradual disappearance had been the culmination of months of subtle influence, as the beings in the mirror realm slowly convinced her that she belonged with them rather than in the physical world. Edmund's suicide had been the final tragedy in a cycle that had repeated itself countless times over the decades. Those who loved the mirror's victims were often driven mad by watching their beloved family members fade away before their eyes, unable to prevent the supernatural abduction or to follow their loved ones into the mirror realm. The guilt and grief of these survivors frequently led them to take their own lives, though their deaths served no purpose other than to add to the mirror's tragic legacy. Blackwood's investigation reached its climax when he discovered that the Ashworth photograph was not unique. Hidden in private collections and museum archives around the world were dozens of similar photographs, all featuring mirrors that showed impossible reflections. These images spanned more than a century of photography, from the earliest daguerreotypes to modern digital photographs, suggesting that the phenomenon was not limited to the specific mirror from Ravenshollow Manor. Each photograph told a similar story of people who had encountered mirrors that served as windows or doorways to other dimensions. The victims were always people who had spent significant time in the presence of these supernatural mirrors, and their fates were invariably tragic. Some disappeared entirely, like Cordelia Ashworth. Others aged rapidly and died of mysterious illnesses. A few went insane and were institutionalized after claiming that they could see alternate realities in every reflective surface they encountered. The photographs themselves seemed to serve as both records of these supernatural encounters and as ongoing connections to the mirror realm. People who studied these images often reported experiencing the same symptoms that had plagued the original victims: insomnia, depression, the sensation of being watched, and most disturbingly, the gradual appearance of impossible reflections in mirrors throughout their own homes. Dr. Kellaway's research team documented 17 cases of people who had suffered supernatural experiences after spending extended time studying photographs that featured impossible mirror reflections. 3 of these individuals had experienced complete psychotic breaks, claiming that they were being pursued by entities that emerged from mirrors. 2 had disappeared entirely under circumstances that police were unable to explain. The rest had suffered varying degrees of psychological trauma that required professional treatment and, in some cases, permanent institutionalization. The Ashworth photograph appeared to be one of the most powerful of these supernatural images, possibly because it had been taken at the moment when Cordelia was beginning her transition between realms. The dark figure visible in the mirror's reflection was believed by some researchers to be Cordelia herself, trapped in the mirror realm and desperately trying to communicate with the physical world. Others theorized that the figure was one of the entities that had lured her into the mirror, forever captured in the act of claiming its victim. Blackwood eventually made the difficult decision to donate the Ashworth photograph to a private research institution that specialized in supernatural phenomena, on the condition that it would never be displayed publicly or studied without proper precautions. The photograph now resides in a specially designed containment facility where it can be examined by qualified researchers without exposing the general public to its potentially dangerous influence. But even in its secured location, the photograph continues to change and evolve. Security cameras monitoring the containment facility have captured footage of the dark figure in the mirror, moving to different positions within the reflected room, and on several occasions, additional figures have appeared in the mirror's depths. Some researchers believe that these additional figures represent new victims who have been claimed by similar mirrors around the world, their souls joining the growing population of the mirror realm. The most disturbing development came in 2023, when digital enhancement revealed that the reflected room in the Ashworth photograph had begun to show signs of decay and deterioration. The bare wooden floors were now warped and stained, the white walls were cracked and yellowed, and the single window was partially boarded up. Most ominously, the dark figure that had remained stationary for over a century and a half had begun to move closer to the mirror's surface, as if it were trying to break through the glass barrier that separated the mirror realm from the physical world. Dr. Kellaway's final report on the Ashworth photograph contained a warning that has since been distributed to museums, collectors, and researchers around the world. She cautioned that mirrors featuring impossible reflections should never be displayed publicly or studied without proper spiritual protection, and that photographs documenting these mirrors should be treated as potentially dangerous supernatural artifacts rather than mere historical curiosities. We are dealing with forces that operate beyond our current understanding of physics and reality, Dr. Kellaway wrote in her conclusion. These mirrors and the photographs that document them appear to be genuine doorways between dimensions, and the entities that exist in the mirror realm are actively working to expand their influence into our world. Every person who studies these images, every researcher who attempts to understand their properties, risks becoming the next victim in a supernatural predation that has been ongoing for centuries. The Ashworth photograph serves as a stark reminder that some mysteries are too dangerous to solve, some knowledge too costly to acquire. In our eagerness to understand the supernatural world, we risk becoming trapped within it ourselves, joining the growing population of souls who exist forever behind the glass, watching our world through mirrors but never again able to participate in the warmth and complexity of human existence. Edmund and Cordelia Ashworth remain frozen in their moment of domestic bliss, captured forever in their anniversary portrait, unaware that they are posing before a doorway to another dimension. Behind them, the mirror continues to show its impossible reflection, a window into a realm where lost souls gather in empty rooms, forever seeking a way to return to the world they can see but never again touch. And somewhere in that reflected space, barely visible in the corner of the frame, the dark figure continues its eternal vigil, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to step too close to the glass and discover that some reflections show not what is, but what hungers to be. The true nature of this phenomenon remains as mysterious today as it was in 1870, but we want to know your thoughts. Use the comments section below and tell us what you believe happened to the Ashworth couple and whether you think mirrors can truly serve as doorways to other dimensions. If you're fascinated by unraveling the secrets behind history's darkest mysteries, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell, because there are many more enigmas waiting to be uncovered, hidden in the shadows of the past, waiting for someone brave enough to bring them into the light.